It's weird being back, you know, particularly after all those years in Moscow. Moscow, Stoke Newington to Highbury. It's a progression of sorts. Looking like Clapham for a while. Tanya fancied it. Clapham. The voice down the line was clear despite the distance. I've lost all sense of geography, have I? Guy chuckled. I dare say. You've been away a long time. It's all changed now. You're Notting Hill. John's Notting Hill. That's to be found in Old Street. Your old Islington with its bars and trendy folk. That's Clapham. Bars, restaurants, you've even got a common, you know. Good charity shops too. God, some things haven't changed. John's voice came down the line from his home of more than a decade in the San Fernando Valley. Guy could hear the tut of John's wife in the background at the reference to the Almighty. He could understand the appeal of Mary Bell, and generally he liked Americans, but he did question his friend's wisdom in marrying a fanatically religious one. I presume there's still one or two second-hand shops in unfashionable Islington, said John. Guy grunted at this, staring down in pride at the oddly coloured dungarees Tanya had banned him from wearing outside. John continued, and the flat, that's okay, is it? Kids like it. Splendid. Tanya, needless to say, has been kept in no mercy with the DIY. It's an ecological park behind the Arsenal tube now, handy for the youngsters. You'd hardly know this place was a football ground from some angles. They've kept the pitch as a communal garden, and there are, as you might expect really, lots of little cannons everywhere. We're in the Old West Stand. Gives some great views. Guy paused for a moment, thinking if he heard a noise like a rattle, before he picked up again. Yeah, best head off. I promised Tanya I'd cook. See you're a team are on telly tonight. I'll watch them in your honour. Guy much preferred rugby to football, particularly Welsh rugby, but even he knew how rare it was for Spurs to be playing in Europe. He switched on his TV, which was slim and wall-mounted, another of Tanya's improvements. Headed into the kitchen to decide what to cook. The game blaring in the next room seemed to be a fairly dull affair, but somebody was taking it very seriously, judging by the amount of shouting and swearing he could hear. Either a window was open or the walls were nowhere near as thick as the estate agent had claimed. He turned to the veg. There came a particularly vigorous bout of shouting, amidst which he could clearly hear the phrase, "fucking kikes." It appeared that Spurs had scored. Then everything went quiet. Guy put down the knife, wiped his hands, went to investigate. The TV had gone dead, and there was no sound from the sweary neighbour either. Iffy electrics. You'd have thought they'd have got that right. Gingerly, he turned the TV back on and went back to the kitchen. After a few minutes, it was apparent that the neighbour was back as well, calmer but still grumbling away. Then a sudden exclamation of joy as Spurs' opponents, some inconsequential little outfit like Sporting Sausage of Lithuania, won a penalty. Guy went in to watch. They missed, and the telly went dead again. Perplexed, he switched it on, returned to the kitchen, just as Tanya arrived home with their children. Hiya, busy day. Yeah, what's for dinner? She leaned over and kissed him. Just then a second Spurs goal went in, followed by a curse, then silence from the living room. I see someone's got the same taste for me as once, said Tanya. What do you mean for once? Well, they're turning off the TV. The other night I was trying to watch a rerun of Sharp and it kept flicking over to the Arsenal game on the other side. I'll have a word with the super tomorrow. It must be the electrics. See if you can do something about the smell as well. I was thinking more like the shouty neighbour. Which one? Silent Twins or Mr. Mute from down the corridor? No, bloke I've been hearing tonight, yelling at the football. Dare say he's stopped now. The next day, the superintendent was sympathetic, but he could find nothing wrong with the electrics. He did confide, however, that there had been similar problems with departments in other sections of the complex. Guy was intrigued and pressed the man for more information. Well, channels changing on the TV, odd noises, particularly the sound of cheering, that sort of thing. The smell of hot dogs and onions, and you'd know how strict our policy is on the timing of barbecues. I shouldn't be telling you this, but one woman was woken up by the sound of a rattle, and another swears she saw a man with a red scarf standing by her bed. I can't understand it. Guy chuckled at this, and once the man had left, dialed John's number to entertain him with the story. The phone was answered by John's eldest, a girl who took after her mother in matters of religion. Oh, hi, Uncle Guy, how's London? No, they're out. Weirdest thing, they're helping the pastor bless a new housing estate. No, really, this one's built on like an old Indian burial ground. Yeah, that's the movie. I haven't seen it, but that's the one. Okay, I'll tell him you called. Relating this to Tanya in the bar with a bubble of squeak later, Guy laughed and said, Indian burial ground, splendid, eh? Only in America. Tanya smiled and said, well, that's a bit rich considering where we live. We've got the ashes of at least a dozen people scattered in the front of our block. Guy's expression was a blank, so Tanya carried on. Surely you knew about that, Guy. Die-hard gooners, whatever they call themselves. All those people whose last wish is for their ashes to be spread on the pitch. Makes sense if you consider everything that's going on, if you ask me. She finished nonchalantly, turning to her drink. You know it's a derby against Tottenham next week, don't you? He said. Well, what's that got to do with it? Well, if you're right, things should liven up. Guy had cause to regret his flippancy soon enough. Over the next few days there was palpable change in the atmosphere around the complex. Many of the incidents were trivial, words appearing on computer screens, songs emanating from deserted corridors, more frequent sightings of the figures in red and white scarves, and the sound of rattles throughout the building. There were other more disturbing events, including a lad in a Spurs shirt who was cycling past the building, narrowly missed being hit by a plant pot. Things came to a head when Guy's quiet neighbour from across the hall swore he'd seen a group of men giving someone a telling off in his bathroom. Apparently they were berating him for racism. Straight up, Guy, they're having a right go. Telling him it wasn't the Arsenal way to attack someone because they were Jewish. Left them to it. Tanya, who'd been listening in, said, so who are you going to call? Goonbusters? A priest? Guy had clearly been thinking this over and had a better idea. No, all we need is a former Arsenal hero, a superstar. We need someone they'll respect to lay them to rest. The neighbour butted in. That's all very well, so we find an Arsenal legend. There's plenty of those still alive. But we need someone who's used to battling demons. Someone who knows how to tackle spirits. Guy was smiling now. Well, there is someone. Tanya, don't you have a friend in the BBC makeup department who knows Tony Adams?